Hello there, I'm David Begnaud at the CBS Broadcast Center in New York City. Thank you for joining us and happy Mother's Day. President Trump is issuing a warning to China, and it comes this weekend. In a series of tweets, the president claims Beijing is waiting around to see if a Democrat will be elected in 2020. Mr. Trump says that's because the negotiations won't lighten up his potential second term, adding it would be wise for China to act now. Those comments come after a trade deal fell apart Friday. It was the same day the Trump administration more than doubled tariffs on nearly $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Officials say plans to resume talks are not even on the calendar yet. Not everyone is behind prolonging the negotiations. That includes some on the president's side of the aisle. On Friday, Republican Senator John Thune highlighted the burden tariffs are putting on U.S. farmers and agriculture. He tweeted, "I believe it's time to wrap up the trade negotiations." Now, the escalating trade war with China was also a focus of the Sunday morning talk shows. Here's some of what you may have missed.
We're in the middle of this, and the president is playing a negotiating battle with the Chinese, and I think he feels that at this point they can't really back out. I think there are ways the Chinese market could open up, and that would be good, but I still have advised the administration, get this done, because the longer we're involved in a tariff battle or a trade war, the better chance there is that we could actually enter into a recession because of it.
I believe that we have got to have policy that better protects American workers and American industries. I believe very strongly that we have to have policies that understand that as it relates to the issue of trade, as it relates to the issue of various countries, including China, which we just talked about, that we have to supply and equip the American worker with the skills and the resources that they need to thrive, not only survive, but thrive.
The United States economy is in a boom. The numbers are coming in terrific, better than anybody expected on growth, on jobs, on unemployment, on wages, on productivity. We're in terrific shape. In order to correct 20 years plus of unfair trading practices with China, as I said, unlawful trading practices, I think this is a risk we should and can take without damaging our economy in any appreciable way. I will note, as others have, maybe this is part of your lightning round bullets, maybe the toughest burdens on the farmers, the agriculture sector. We get that.
What I would do differently is mobilize the world against China's mercantilist trading policies, which the president is right to point out have been unfair. But putting tariffs on our allies, putting tariffs on even the Chinese that are actually taxes on American producers, American farmers, taxes on the American consumer, and taxes on the American worker, I think are completely the wrong way of doing this. And I can assure you the Chinese have a longer attention span than Donald Trump has.
All right, let's talk to David Nakamura. He's a reporter for the Washington Post, and he's in our D.C. bureau right now. David, what are the specifics on the disputes between the U.S. and China?
You know, David, it looked like they were headed to maybe wrapping up a deal, but they, as often is the case with these kind of negotiations, the harder issues were, the ones that still had not been agreed on. And those have to do with intellectual property protections that the United States is seeking, and also really trying to sort of change the way that China demands U.S. companies enter into the Chinese market, which include turning over trade secrets and limiting other ways that they can invest. And so the U.S. is saying, hey, we need to level the playing field and make it more fair to our companies and ultimately to the American economy and sort of the way we do business. So what you saw at the last minute was that the president's advisors told him that the Chinese were backtracking on some of these key fundamental issues. And the question was how hard a line the U.S. would take. And we saw that Trump, about a week ago, issued that first tweet saying, hey, we're going to raise tariffs by the end of the week if this does not come together. And that's exactly what he did.
David, it's interesting. I saw a tweet this week that said, listen, if Trump runs just on the economy and focuses on that, he'll win re-election. I thought it was interesting to hear Rand Paul say, I'm worried about a potential recession if we go too hard on this China issue.
Sure. You saw also in that same introductory clips you were showing that Larry Kudlow, the White House economic advisor, talked about the other aspect, which is, hey, the economy is good. The president got good numbers on the economy again this past week. So they do feel like they have some leverage over the Chinese. However, you make a good point. If the president, who has been riding on these continued economic growth, suddenly faces headwinds on that, it does complicate his message at a time when other major priorities, such as North Korea, immigration at the border, others remain unsettling, unsettled to say the least. And so that's the balance you have from this White House. At the same time, you also do understand that Democrats have long been sort of in alliance with the labor unions, workers on economic issues like trade. And the Democrats have been more resistant to opening trade with foreign countries and so on. And so I think there's some concern that if they had a bad deal with China and things went to next year, China was caught cheating, violating the agreement, it would open the president up to some attacks, if he was facing off against a Democrat on his signature issue on trade.
All right, let's turn to Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, headed to Russia today. It's his first trip as Secretary of State. I wonder what's agenda item number one when he meets with Putin.
It was pointed out that Pompeo canceled a meeting with Angela Merkel, of the U.S. ally in Germany, right around the time he announced he would be doing this meeting in Russia. And there's a lot of speculation that Pompeo's going. There's a lot of important global challenges in which Russia's involved in, from Venezuela to Syria,
right,
to even North Korea. But the idea that, in the wake of the Mueller report, there's some sort of damage control and sort of patching up of relations among the leadership. President Trump has continued to say that he wants good relations with Vladimir Putin. And so the end result of that, we don't know. But I think there's a sense that Pompeo this is his first trip, that he's going to sort of clear the air with Putin, talk about the administration's position on some of these key issues that we just talked about, but try to square also sort of how the administration has reacted to some of the hotspots around the globe with Trump's continued rhetoric and his own conversations that he's had with Putin.
All right, let's talk about the president's taxes. The House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Richard Neal has subpoenaed the president's taxes. This Tuesday is the deadline for the IRS commissioner, as well as the Treasury Secretary, to comply. Last week, though, as you know, the Treasury Department formally denied Mr. Neal's request. Do you expect the use of the subpoena to be a game changer here?
It does not look like it's going to be a game changer. This administration is fighting back on virtually all aspects of investigations by Congress into all sorts of conduct by the president, both personal and his financial dealings, as well as his policies. And I think that there's been a real sense in the White House that the Congress is overstepping its boundaries. That's what they're saying on all number of things. The president himself has been very clear that he didn't release his taxes in 2016, that he doesn't plan to. And so I think that the White House is willing to fight this battle. They believe that they can make Democrats look petty, look like they're overreaching. And whether it's the Mueller report or his personal taxes, the president believes that in the end, the public will think that the Democrats are focused on this when they should be focusing on the economy and other legislative issues.
But David, in this case, let's say the Trump administration continues to double down. They don't respond to any request. Is the thought that the court will force them to?
It's unclear. I mean, we have to see how that comes out. I mean, I think the Democrats are thinking, yes, that's what they hope would happen, and that the judicial branch would force this. And it's a fundamental question of, conduct. But I don't think that the White House sees it the same way, clearly. And I think that they're going to keep, fighting two battles. One is a legal battle, but the other is, the White House has been doing their own lawsuits to prevent, people from complying with these orders. And so I think there's that aspect, and then there's the public relations battle. The president seems clearly believe that that he's going to come out ultimately ahead, at least with not only his base, but a broader sector of the public.
Control room, can we play that shot from Nancy Pelosi and what she said this week?
The president is almost self-impeaching because he is every day demonstrating more obstruction of justice and disrespect for Congress's legitimate role to subpoena. So again, this is very methodical. It's very Constitution-based. It's very law-based. It's very factually based. It's not about pressure. It's about patriotism.
David, the stumble in her statement right there, I think, said a lot, because she's been a hard line about, listen, don't go down that impeachment road. It's going to divide the country, and we don't have the votes in the Senate. But I wonder if she's moving herself a little now, or if her party is kind of budging her on the issue.
I feel like the party is probably budging her on the issue, and a lot of the Democratic voters as well. There's the question ultimately of the president's conduct during the course of this Mueller investigation, but I think she's trying to say, the president, even after the Mueller investigation, is showing that in trying to intimidate, witnesses from testifying to Congress, and sort of reports now we have about the president apparently, allegedly, and he denies this, asking Don McGahn to make a public statement that he'd not try to obstruct justice, that his own lawyer that the White House is doing more obstructing, and that she uses the term self-impeachment. I think it gives her some wiggle room of saying she has said she is concerned about the politics of a formal impeachment process, but saying that the president himself is doing that kind of work gives her a chance to kind of start to go down that road.
All right, before you go, this is really interesting. This week you reported on how some Boston Red Sox players refused to attend a White House celebration for their World Series win. You said after conducting some interviews with those who opted not to accept the president's invitation, the Red Sox banned you from their clubhouse? What happened?
They did. I was up in Baltimore where they were playing the Orioles the day before. Half the team or so was going to visit the White House. And I was, before the game, was asking some questions about that. It's very politically sensitive. And ultimately, when, after the game, the locker room reopens, I was trying to, in particular, talk to the starting pitcher who was not available before the game, Chris Sale. But I was told by a Red Sox media official I would not be permitted if we talked about this topic. And there's no formal, Major League Baseball policy that bans, questions that are not about the game, after the game is over. But I was told in no uncertain terms they were tired of the topic, and that some of the players had been, concerned that I was asking this in the clubhouse. The players I talked to had answered, not all, very, effusively, but they had, answered my questions ahead of time. So I was a bit concerned. And then I was told later that, of all things, the manager, Alex Cora, who was not going to the White House ceremony over concerns about the state of the recovery in Puerto Rico, his native country, that he actually brought up in his post-game remarks more about the White House visit. So I was a bit concerned about that. I think what it did, though, was it shows, the discomfort on the team about this politically sensitive issue. The team was divided along racial lines, with the minority players not attending for the most part, and the white players electing to go. And the management said, look, we left it up to the team, the players individually. We visited under Bush when we won a title. We visited under Obama when we won a title. So we didn't want to change this. We're apolitical. We don't judge. But the way it broke down, it says something about this era that we're in, maybe about the President Trump himself and his divisive rhetoric and policies, and people taking sides over this. So that's what I was writing about in it. But it seemed clear from the way they treated me after the game that they were a bit concerned about having to continue to address this.
Well, David, it's just interesting because a week ago today, Alex Cora gave the scoop to El Nuevo Dia, who's the largest print outlet on the island of Puerto Rico, that he wasn't going to the White House. And I tweeted out about it, and Cora liked the tweet that I sent, got several thousand replies. So, are the Boston Red Sox media folks not talking to Cora? I mean, he's been very vocal.
Cora's been Cora's been the most outspoken. The players a little bit less. So I was trying to get some of the players, and maybe that was the rub. Before the game, though, to your point, Cora, 2 days before I went up there in Baltimore, he had talked extensively about it. The next day, he talked a little bit, and then when I did go up Wednesday, I started asking Cora again before the game, and he did finally say, "I'm done talking about it. My team knows where I am. I'm done." And I said, "What about the cultural moment we're in? Can you talk about that?" And he said, "No." And he went off to batting practice to oversee that. And then, but after the game, he brought it up again. I think maybe he felt the questions were coming out. Maybe someone informed him I was who I was and what I was talking about. But you're right. I mean, from your tweet to others, I mean, he's been somebody who's wanted to get a message out about Puerto Rico. But the catcher of the team, Christian Vasquez, also from Puerto Rico, said told me he had relatives had roofs blown off their house and electricity that was out. The team had visited Puerto Rico twice last year, including after the World Series, where they had a big parade. So Cora's saying it wasn't directly. It was like, I didn't want to be seen celebrating at this time where my country folk are still struggling. But given where we are with President Trump and Puerto Rico and his embellishment or exaggeration of how much money has been authorized, some concern, widespread criticism from officials in Puerto Rico that the administration did not respond adequately, and Trump fighting back and blaming them for what's gone on in the recovery. Cora's remarks are read in a certain way beyond maybe even what he is saying that they were intended, and it's become certainly a political flashpoint.
I just appreciate the chance to mention and talk about Puerto Rico. The president has said all week that they've gotten $91 billion. That is not true. Right. It is false, and I would encourage you to do the research. It is nowhere near $91 billion.
It's very
David
well said.
Nakamura, thank you very much.
Thanks, David.